slavery in the more modern world, as we call the United States the modern world. What are some of these comparisons?
Well, I mean, I would say that the basic fundamentals of what slavery is are the same. The ownership of one human being by another. Because I know some people have tried to make the case that there are some conceptual differences between slavery depending on where you're at, but I don't think that's necessarily the case. I mean, slavery is fairly basic in that sense. It's quite literal ownership.
Absolutely, ownership of property. Now, where most people misunderstand is the contrast, right? Different versions of slavery happened over time, right? So you can talk about how slavery was in the ancient world.
Yeah, and even then it varies between the different ancient civilizations a bit. So, for instance, one of the major factors in ancient slavery, and one of the differences between the Greeks and the Romans even, is just mere scale. So, in the Greek world, most slave owners would only have a handful of slaves. And the effect of that is that they're much more protective of their slaves. They're less likely to be exploitative in a way that would result in death or serious injury because it would be economically damaging to them. Whereas in Rome, a lot of the large scale senators have these massive plantations, and they were often willing to overlook an immense amount of cruelty. And a lot of times, because of the number of slaves they owned, they weren't really looking after them in any meaningful sense. So just scale alone actually is pretty significant in terms of the quality of life for a slave or their experiences.
Yeah, absolutely. And then here in the United States, you had race based chattel slavery. Okay, that is the big line in the sand. You had uh, intergenerational slavery. Okay, a woman's womb was property. And then, of course, you had sexual exploitation,
Mm-hmm.
also intertwined with slavery in the United States. One minute, black people are considered property, and then clearly the next minute they are uh, sexually trafficked. So it's a very forked tongue situation with slavery in the United States as opposed to slavery in other places. So in the United States, you had a justification for it, you had a pretext for it. And uncomfortable as it may seem for some, most people already know that religion was used as justification for chattel slavery in the United States. But uncomfortable as it is for some to hear this for the first time, that wasn't the case everywhere. So you want to talk about that justification or the lack thereof in the ancient world?
Sure. So, first, I'd like to make the point about sort of like who gets enslaved in antiquity. So, in antiquity, there is some discomfort with enslaving one's own people. That being said, it happens.
Mm-hmm.
So, for instance, the Greeks, to the extent that they opposed slavery, even in, say, democratic Athens, it was mostly limited to the idea that they shouldn't be enslaving other Greeks.
Right.
So, part of Aristotle's analysis in his works on politics is that he says that Greeks by nature are free men, and barbarians, that being any non-Greek, so people who sound like they say bar 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 when they talk,
Ah,
are natural born slaves.
right, right. It sounds like the doctrine of discovery a little bit with enslaving people who aren't Christians for some.
It's kind of like that, yeah.
Mm.
And also, the thing about ethnicity in antiquity is that once you learn how to speak Greek and you learn Greek culture, you're more or less Greek as long as you want to be.
Mm.
And another part of that is, so that's part of why people say that ethnicity matters more for race in antiquity
Right.
or than race, because the Greeks a lot of times when they colonize places, and keep in mind these are the Greeks who invented philosophy and are supposed to be this peaceful, enlightened people. But the way that they did colonization is that it would be an all-male colony that goes out, and when they'd find a place they want to settle, they would then take wives by going to a local tribe, killing the men, capturing the women, bringing them back, and then cutting out the women's tongues so they wouldn't be able to teach their kids a non-Greek language.
Mm.
So, I mean, there's some built-in brutality with the Greeks that I think a lot of people easily overlook.
Absolutely.
And but again, slavery could happen to anyone, but usually you're more likely to be freed if you're enslaved by people who are your same ethnicity, because then they'd be a little bit embarrassed by the fact that they own you.
Mm-hmm. it's interesting. People who read Anthony Browder are probably ready to jump through the screen if they hear you say that Greeks invented philosophy because the research of Anthony. No, that's okay. The research of Anthony Browder is deep. You guys can do that independently. But so you would say the justification for initially enslaving Greeks was based upon individuals not being Greek.
Usually. And a lot of the justification, too, is the idea of the prize of war.
Mm-hmm.
So, like in the Iliad, for instance, whenever someone's captured in war, it's considered to be a spear-won person or a spear-won land. Mm-hmm. And, I mean, the whole conflict in the Iliad Book 1 between Achilles and Agamemnon is over Agamemnon's right, I guess you could say, to hold the woman Chryses as his hostage because he took her in a battle, so therefore she's his property and his prize. So there is partly this idea of people you capture in battle being your prize, and therefore you have a kind of entitlement to own them. So that's part of early Greek ethics, mm-hmm. is that this idea of anybody who's captured in war is justly made a slave.
Right. Yeah, for sure. And in fact, that goes to the point of Africans at one point enslaved other Africans, right? Most people know that story and they like to talk about that. But what the United States chose to do, and it was a choice, was to create an ideology behind enslavement and then turn it into chattel, right? So you had different versions of slavery: captives of war, prisoners of war. Oftentimes in the ancient world, antiquity, people were a part of the family. They weren't, their children weren't slaves just because they were enslaved. So that version of slavery and servitude was a lot different than what people are familiar with race-based ethnicity slavery, with the justification behind it. And I think what people really may need to understand is how that justification was intertwined with society, right? And then religion also, right? Because if you read any of those primary documents by politicians at the time, it was definitely heavy with, the curse of Ham and stuff like that, right?
From what I understand, though, in that period where, especially the South is trying to develop this ideology to justify slavery, I mean, wasn't this a fairly late emergence, like 1820s and 30s, in terms of the fully formed idea that slavery is actually a positive good?
Right. That would be your John C. Calhoun's, your James Hammond, your Fitzhughs. Those would be your politicians. Oftentimes I like to play the video A Cult of Personality for my students so they can understand the power of, I think we're showing our age when we talk about that in Living Color song, The Cult of Personality. But I play it every semester for my students when I'm explaining the power that the Southern states had at this time over Congress, over the presidency. Well, heck, they left because Lincoln was elected and they didn't vote for him, right? So it was a powerful trick, and I think most people know that slave owners were the minority. However, they had the most power, right? They had the most influence, okay? And it wasn't until slavery was over, that 13th Amendment, where white people who were poor in the South were actually able to get employment opportunities, right? So slavery puts everyone out of business, So slavery being eliminated was good for poor white Americans, so they can have employment opportunities to support their family in a substantial way.
I mean, I'm sure similar things, well, and especially in the Roman world at least, slavery also was quite harmful for the poorer citizens and then free non-citizens, because what happens in Italy in the course of the late Republic is that land becomes more and more concentrated in fewer and fewer hands, and the wealthy senators and others who are accumulating land, what they're doing is creating vast plantations and filling them up with slaves who are mostly captives from foreign wars. So then your small farmers have their land lost, and they end up more or less unemployed back in Rome. So they're either unemployed or underemployed. In the meantime, the countryside is full of people who obviously do not want to be slaves. And that's actually how Rome gets its three major slave revolts, is because they look around and they realize there aren't that many free people holding them back, so they start rebelling. As makes sense, especially since the gladiators were also slaves and they had weapons and skills.
Yes.
So, why not try to revolt? And especially so the Romans had to start being careful about not importing a massive number of slaves from any given war or any given region at one time. So that was part of the problem with the first slave revolt in Sicily, is that they brought over a bunch of slaves from Syria all at once. So they all could communicate, and one of them knew about the Seleucid Empire's customs, so he claimed to be the next Seleucid king, and started the revolt. So it became a real social problem even for the free people of Rome, that slavery was not only taking away their land, but also creating massive disruptions in the countryside in general.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Why don't you talk more about the ideology of enslaving other people in ancient times?
Well, so it can be a bit complex because I think there's a little bit of difference between the Greeks and the Romans in this regard. So for the Greeks, they only really start to try to sort of wrap their heads around slavery starting around the 4th century, so the late classical period. And a lot of the conclusion they come to is that it's problematic to enslave other Greeks, and that's something they've been working on for a while. So usually one of the benefits of citizenship is that you can't be enslaved for debt. So that's something they have sort of evolved in the archaic period.
Mm-hmm.
And then later on, the idea starts to shift to the notion that there are certain groups that make good slaves, like the Thracians to their immediate north, they regard as barbarous. And sometimes it will get a little bit racial, actually, because they'll talk about how the Thracians tend to have red hair, therefore they're a little different, although it's also then that much more interesting and contradictory because in the Iliad, King Menelaus is famously red-haired. So they're not that different.
Right. No.
So it starts to get, they don't really have a coherent reason to own slaves. Mm-hmm. It's more just something that is a practice that dates back well into the Bronze Age that they've just inherited, and they're trying to sort of fit that in, and that becomes a real problem in democracy, at least intellectually. But it's not as big of a problem as we might think for them, because in democratic Athens, where you have universal male participation, about half the population is enslaved.
Interesting. Mm-hmm.
So the leisure that citizens have is because they have slaves doing their work.
Right.
So, and I think there's a case to be made that ironically, like, the idea of freedom only makes sense when you see people who have no freedom. Right. You can only really articulate what it means when you've seen the exact opposite.
Right. And like you said, there's no justification for slavery. Right, all these ideologies are makeshift, right? Because even people who are Bible scholars, and I am a woman who has read the entire Bible, it was on purpose, right? I purposely wanted to conquer that. And you're not supposed to enslave other Christians, right? Yeah. So that's in the Bible. You guys can read that, all right? But understand that. So that right there is a problem for individuals who converted to Christianity and were still enslaved. And for a short period of time, that there were Africans who converted to Christianity and were able to evade slavery via that loophole, but then clearly it fell by the wayside. And state by state, Maryland, Virginia, Massachusetts, they began to eradicate that law.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely. Why don't you explain to the listeners how slavery ended in Greece and Rome?
Well, so in Greece, the Greeks lost their independence to the Romans.
Yes.
So the Romans took over. And most Roman slavery was actually fueled by war. One big difference also between Roman and Greek slavery is that in Roman slavery, manumission was actually very common. So in Greek slavery, it happens, but it's a little bit more exceptional. And usually it only happens to people who are high skilled, and their skills are very valued, so the city that they live in will reward them to keep them around. But in Rome, it was almost standard for people to be freed at a certain point. And partly it's for reasons that are actually not very charitable. So Cato the Elder, who is a notorious, I don't know how to describe him, let's just call him a notorious person.
Okay.
His advice to slave owners is that if your slave is old and sickly, then in order to avoid paying to keep them up, you should free them right before they die, so that way they can, die on their own dime. But there are people who are kinder than Cato, obviously, who actually freed slaves because they grew up with them and they respected them. Like Cicero had a secretary who was a slave named Tyro, and he very much, they were good friends, and he made sure Tyro was taken care of. But it was standard that you would be freed at some point. So the point is, once you stop taking in as many POWs because of manumission over time, slavery kind of dies out. Now, there were people still born into slavery, but they're being born at a lower rate than people are being manumitted. So effectively what happens is that by the time we get to about the 3rd or 4th century, now that Rome is no longer expanding, there just isn't a large slave population anymore. It's just kind of fizzled out.
Interesting on how it could fizzle out because there's no justification behind it, right? There's no pretense behind it. There's no ideology behind it. And that's pretty much what happened in places like Africa and the like, right? Because of these contrasts in slavery. But in the United States, clearly we have a civil war over slavery, right? No matter how you slice it and dice it, states' rights, the right to do what, right? Own slaves.
I mean, isn't the right to have a tariff on, let's see, what good? I don't know.
Property?
Yeah. Or what? things grown by slaves, maybe?
Yeah. Cotton?
But,
right.
There's actually, I do always find it funny when because I feel like every few years there's a big article that'll get a push that actually the Civil War was about this thing. And I think one of the more recent ones was about the rise of Wall Street power.
Oh, yes. I've probably read that one. Yeah. But this is how I like to say, if the United States did not have slavery, we would have never had a civil war, right? Yeah. Never. It never would have occurred, okay? And what people fail to realize is even after the Civil War was over, you had individuals who were slave owners who relocated to Brazil in order to continue to try to push slave labor and grow cotton.
Yeah, the Confederados.
Right. So, like I say, I really, people who do not want to believe that the Civil War wasn't about slavery, they continue to work hard to do that, and they have that right. But the Civil War was over black people being enslaved, all right?
Yeah, or another good example that I learned from my buddy Sean, who is a Civil War expert, is that around 1864, the Confederates knew they were losing the war, so they were looking for ways to revitalize their war effort. And one of their generals, Patrick Cleburne, made a proposal that they should offer freedom to slaves who are willing to serve in the army.
That is correct. That happened.
And the government ordered him to never repeat those words again.
Absolutely.
So he was kind of almost blackballed, and even though he's one of the more skilled commanders, he was never promoted again either.
100%. And in fact, that was one of the reasons behind Lincoln's emancipation, right? To stop the southern states from using their slaves during this war, right? So yeah, I mean, a variety of arguments go into it, but like I said, the bottom line, if you don't have slavery in the United States, we don't have a civil war. And, a lot of literature talk about the mere fact that the idea of men having access to all these women's bodies is another cause for the Civil War, another uncomfortable topic, but there are a lot of powerful men who have access to a lot of enslaved women and their bodies, and little girls and little boys. Let's be, we're all adults here. That people did not want to stop doing, and that was a cause, whether people want to admit it or not. It's a variable in this equation.
Yeah, I mean, every slave owner in the South was effectively an aristocratic lord who was unaccountable on his own lands. I mean, they could abuse the people under them as much as they wanted with no repercussions because there were no legal means of redress. I guess the most famous example, but I would say probably a pretty mild one compared to what almost certainly happened on most plantations, is Jefferson's relationship with what's her name, Sally Hemings.
That is correct. Absolutely. Yeah. And today we call that pedophilia. He was in his 40s. He was a teenager, 14, 15.
Something like that.
So, that's clearly rape, whether or not they consent or not.
Yeah.
So, and there's a lot of literature on not just Thomas Jefferson, although he's the most obvious. And that goes back to that forked tongue I talked about, right? You are part property, but you don't have sexual relationships with a desk or a chair. That's, so you need to figure out how you're going to.
Except in Florida.
Yes, I mean, people, well, that was the overarching issue with Margaret Garner. That's the book, Toni Morrison Beloved's, based off of that book, where she's escaping her slave owner, the enslaver, across the Ohio River, and her children were by him, all right, very fair-skinned children, and she took it upon herself to cause harm to those children, to try to prevent the slave catchers from taking her back into slavery. And she was successful in that act. And the prosecutors at the time didn't know whether or not to charge her for property damage or murder. Because if they charge her with murder, then you are admitting that this person is a human being.
And you're setting that legal precedent.
Interesting. So very, like I said, America's full of hypocrisy, but the world is full of hypocrisy.
Yeah, and I guess a lot of the American defenders of slavery were also able to draw upon some of the writings of Aristotle and others, because, a lot of the Founding Fathers were actually very well read in the classics. Aristotle actually defines a slave as an animate tool, and I believe that quote was pretty widely circulated.
Oh, 100%. And in fact, John C. Calhoun was an expert. People would call him an expert in the classics, for sure. And he would quote Socrates and Aristotle quite often. And of course, they would use the Bible. You know that. Servants and slavery in the Bible. That's why the entire slave Bible came about, where the book of Exodus was taken out. A significant part of Ephesians. So anything that spoke about freedom and equality was taken out of this slave Bible that was heavily circulated in the South. And everything about servitude and slavery was used to justify the actions of the people in charge.
Yeah. It's almost as if the people in charge are self-serving when it comes to how they tend to frame things.
That is true. And you can't really, this is how I look at it. I blame the people who believe it. Right?
So, yeah, they're culpable.
Yes.
Yeah.
I've always been that type of person to look back and analyze and assess and say, this isn't working for me, right? How are your pockets getting fatter and richer and I'm not? So I've always been.
No, I'm the same way.
That person.
I always find it disturbing that there are certain pieces of misinformation that are easily reproduced and repeated, especially things that are clearly against somebody's best interest. I've heard poor people argue against programs that are designed specifically to help them, and it's just kind of frustrating.
Because it's marketed in a way that it's going to help other people who they have been indoctrinated with. That yes, you get that very well, but yeah, that's unfortunate. That's a divide and conquer tactic that has been used since the beginning of time, against black people versus white people versus white people, black people versus black people. This divide and conquer thing has always been a very useful tool for some people,
Yeah, I mean, they keep doing it because it's extremely effective. It works generation after generation. It's partly why the movie They Live is probably my favorite film of all time.
Oh, for sure, for sure, absolutely. Yeah, but getting back, people, They Live.
Yeah.
We should live stream that, like with comments.
Yeah, I mean, we'd have to keep the film itself on complete silent in order to do that, but it's doable. I tried to do something like that with Sean one time for Turtles 2, but it didn't quite work out. But I think I know how to do it now. I'm not, but anyway, it'd have to be pure commentary.
Right.
So that'd be like a headphone setup. But we could probably do that though. It's doable.
But yeah, it's we're all the human race. Clearly, we as human beings, we look like phenotypically. We look like where our ancestors migrated to, right? We all come from Africa. We all have that black ancestor. For those racists in the crowd who think they are pure-blooded, whatever, you are sadly mistaken. All right. Yeah. I did my recent DNA, and I was shocked by some of it, but most was pretty spot on. Most black people we know, but yeah. So we all have a common ancestor that started in Africa, and then people began to migrate out, and then phenotypically we look like where our ancestors stayed, right? So you have those traits that benefit you as a result of the weather, everything from your hair texture, right, to your skin color. Yeah. And that's just how it works, right? We're all in that same image, but again, that divide and conquer tactic is pretty useful.
Yeah, no, it tends to pay dividends for people in power. I forget the name. There's also a movie about a labor dispute from the 20s or from like the World War One era. It's set in Chicago. I think it's called The Killing Floor.
I haven't seen that one, but I'm interested.
Yes, made by PBS. It was a movie from the 80s. That one shows how the workers at butchery shops would play white workers against black workers in order to prevent them from organizing for better wages. And I think eventually the workers were able to meet together and work on that, but just playing up the prejudice there almost completely nixed that labor movement. So, I mean, those divide and conquer tactics are extremely effective.
Yeah, they are. I'll have to check that movie out for sure. But that sounds like, certain circumstances that occurred during the populist movement in the United States with Eugene Debs, the farmers, and it wasn't successful, but it had some steam. But it sounds like that's pretty much what happened. David Roediger does a lot of research about that. When Black Americans began to migrate from the South to the North during the war years for the war industries, you had a lot of conflict with Europeans coming in and labor disputes, individuals wanting equal pay, individuals not giving that equal pay. So that sounds pretty interesting.
Yeah. But yeah, and I guess, going back to especially slavery in America, I mean, you can see that too with the way that poor whites became complicit in a system that didn't really do anything for them except make them feel like they're a rung above another group of people.
Yes, that is pretty much what those politicians aimed to do at the time. Like I mentioned, Fitzhugh and Hammond and Calhoun, just to name a few. But that was what basically what their literature says. I'm a woman of primary sources. I go right to the source, and they talk about that. They say like they are indoctrinating these poor whites with your skin color being a badge of privilege, right? The curse of Ham. These people are here and you are here because of your skin color, right? So yeah, you're right about that. That was intentional. Clearly all lies, right? But people believed it. People believed it, and it became an ideology, and it became a justification, and it carried over. Right? I mean, it was part of I mean, an ideology. Some people still say today, in fact, that was the biggest part of desegregation in some of the branches of the government, in the military. It was black officers being over white candidates and cadets. That was a big deal. Like this black person, man or woman, who's in charge is being over everyone else. That was a really big problem with desegregating the military.
Yeah.
People took offense to that because, again, it goes back to that ideology. People are taught something, sometimes it's hard to break it, and sometimes it's not.
Yeah, I think that was when Truman desegregated the Army. Was that before or after 1948 election?
That was after.
Okay.
That was after. Yeah, that was after.
All right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because I know that was a huge deal at the time, and from what I understand, and
that
I
was
guess
the same year, actually.
You'd know more about this than I would.
That's when he desegregated it.
Okay, so
yeah,
1949.
Yeah. 48.
48.
Yeah.
There's also Teddy Roosevelt started allowing black people into the civil service, and then was it Woodrow Wilson kind of
yes
reversed that?
Yes. Thomas Woodrow Wilson, indeed. Woodrow Wilson, I'm going to tell you, I'm going to try not to go on a tangent about Woodrow Wilson, but he had some very egregious opinions, all right? J. Edgar Hoover actually is intertwined with Woodrow Wilson. Most people don't know that. J. Edgar Hoover started out at the Library of Congress as just a lone researcher, and worked his way all the way up to become the J. Edgar Hoover that we know of, right, as today. Buildings named after him, right? The FBI. But Woodrow Wilson, classmates with Thomas Dixon, roommates actually. The book The Klansman, Birth of a Nation, was based off of that book. Yes. So, and then of course that film is shown in the White House, the first film ever shown in the White House. Birth of a Nation has this Klan as his victorious, figure, saving the South from the blacks and all this type of dun 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 dun.
Yeah, I think Wilson called it history written with lightning.
Yes,
or something like that,
yes.
I know Wilson is probably one of the more I would say
racist.
Oh, racist, yeah. But also just in many ways fascinating figures just overall, just because I feel like he kind of does represent a lot of the contradictions of that era perfectly. Like this one person that sort of embodies all the contradictions and hypocrisy of America as it was in the early 20th century.
I would agree with that. And it's embarrassing as academics
that he was one of us.
He was one. I don't put him over on my side, but you can have him. Oh. He was a president of Princeton, right? He and that is the overarching issue, Derek, that I think I have with this ideology of ignorance, is that oftentimes it comes from people who are well read, mm-hmm. right? I'm open to a person's opinion, but I don't like when people create their own facts and distort information, and because when people are well read, they have the ability to do that. Like scientific racism comes from people who are well read. This idea of drapetomania was by a physician. His last name is Cartwright. He created this idea. It's called drapetomania. So when slaves would run away and want their freedom, he diagnosed them with drapetomania. So it wasn't slavery that they were trying to get the Yes.
I mean, if you're not happy with intolerable circumstances, you're the problem.
Yes.
You should adapt yourself to this horror.
It's the problem for me. Like I said, the good academics who can disagree with policy and ideas and not get personal and just deal with the facts is something that I truly appreciate. But unfortunately, so many of us, they have misinformation. The New England Journal of Medicine was one of the front runners in pushing some of this scientific racism, like black people have extra this and extra that. Their skin texture is tougher, so you don't have to like this. These are lies, right? These are lies. We all have the same blood. We all have the same pain tolerance.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, it comes from people with letters behind their names, like PhD. You and I earned that, and we need to start separating some of those people who are incorrect with people who are correct.
Yeah, and also I think there's a heavy burden when you have an advanced degree to not try to prognosticate about things that you don't truly know, and then you try to rely upon your personal authority to sell it to people who will assume that you're more correct than you are. There's a notorious example. There's a guy who is very Islamophobic. His name is Bill Warner. He's got a PhD in mechanical engineering or something like that. And if you look at his site long enough, you see that. But he portrays himself as an expert on Islam. So he's one of those guys who, presents the Quran in a fairly literal way that, if you look historically, it's rarely been actually applied that way. Yes, it does say to read it literally. But you can look at all of the Islamic empires, including Mali, and see that they rarely actually enforce Islamic law in a literal sense because it's just not practicable. But he is one of those guys who preaches about the global caliphate and all this other, kind of out there stuff. And because he's got the PhD, people take him far more seriously than they should. But speaking of scientific racism, there actually is a precedent for that in Greece. And this is also how you know that men were the determining factor of what was culture in ancient Greece. So they would take Thracians and others to slave markets, and they would portray them nude and buy them and sell them. Well, what the Greeks noticed is that the Thracians and the people they were taking captive tended to have larger penises than they did. So, what do we make of this? Well, obviously, having a large penis is a bad thing, because it means that you're more likely to become enslaved. So the reason is because these guys with these larger penises clearly are oversexed. And because they're so oversexed, that's why they've been less successful and why they've been captured in war.
Interesting.
So clearly having a smaller penis is superior, and that's why you notice the Greek statues, Apollo and all the other gods are not particularly well hung.
Interesting.
It's not a coincidence.
Interesting. Yeah. That is an interesting explanation on why those statues appear the way they do. And that's also verification that people with the power can make the rules.
Yeah.
Because that is definitely an opinion. I will tell you this. What you just said correlates to a lot of the lynchings that happened in the United States. And I have information about this on my website. So, very sadistic, but almost every time a male, right, because women were lynched as well, but almost every time a male is lynched, a black male is lynched, his genitalia is cut off. Yes.
Okay, I didn't realize that.
Absolutely. It's very interesting how, of course, other body parts are, extracted as well, but the black male's penis is cut off oftentimes during these lynchings. And what I like about the way it's documented in the newspaper, because the book by Ginsberg highlights it very well. Journalists write about it. It's not a secret. It's put on postcards. It's documented. It's vicious. Yes.
Yeah,
and it's passed around like a treasure trove, like a toy.
Ooh.
Yeah, it's just very interesting.
Well, I know some of those lynch mobs were brutal, and one story that stuck with me. I learned it as an undergrad doing North Carolina history. Is the Wilmington race riot, where there was the false report, a woman had gotten pregnant and she was ashamed to tell her family that she had been having an affair with somebody. So instead, she made up a story that she'd been raped by a black guy. So this got a mob worked up, and I think they killed, 120 black men before she finally confessed. Oh yeah, it's actually just some white guy I had an affair with. And from what I understand, the public who had done all these lynchings at that point, they based the white public, that is, of course, they said, well, at least we put them in their place.
That actually is a fact. You're right. In fact, politicians spoke about that often. This was a method of, quote unquote, putting people in their place. Like, not having them to step out of line, and that's sick, right? But that's the history that people don't like to talk about. But the United States, that was a brutal time period, right? And in fact, the United States is go back to being hypocritical. We go from a time period of slavery where, enslavers and all these people have black people nursing their children, breastfeeding black women, breastfeeding white babies, and, black men in the house and out doing all these things in close proximity to almost overnight being villains. Like, how does that happen? It's very peculiar. By Reconstruction, black people are the big bad wolf, but during slavery, everything was close proximity, and let's be clear, men were taken advantage of as well, right? Some of those enslaved men that's rape, right? When you unwillingly want to participate in a sexual act with a woman, that is rape. And some of these black men were raped by white women, right? Some of those older white women, some of those younger white women, but you clearly can't say no. What are you going to do?
You don't really have a choice.
Yeah, so exploitation happened on both ends. I want to be clear about that. I was looking at, and I hope I saved it, and I might put this on my website, but it's kind of provocative, so in fact I probably won't. But I was doing some research in the archives, and I came across a picture of, he was a slave owner, appeared to be one, and he was sitting with his legs gapped, common male position. When you sit. And there was a little boy sitting. There's no misunderstanding with this, all right? I'm like, there's no misunderstanding this interpretation in this image. He was provocatively sitting between his legs, right? Like, anyone, you don't need a PhD to see this. Anyone who would look at this image would automatically say this is inappropriate, okay? Automatically. So stuff like that was definitely jarring for me. I come across a lot of that when I'm looking through the archives. Just a lot of just provocative images like that. I was doing research on like how healthcare was started, and gynecology and stuff like that was started on black women, and how you test stuff. Harriet Washington does that research, but I was kind of deviating from her work a little bit. But yeah, it's interesting stuff. Yeah.
No, it is. It's it's amazing within a fairly recent amount of time how many just awful practices have been perpetrated just in the world immediately around us. Crazy to think about.
How do you think religion influenced Rome, the Romans and the Greeks, when it came to slavery? How do you think religion influenced that?
Well, there wasn't a great deal of interaction, but there was a little bit, in the sense that in the Greek world especially, whenever you brought a new slave in, you would actually make them an official part of your oikos, or household. So the way you would do that is you would have them parade around your mantelpiece, where your household gods would be. And so that made it to where, even though obviously being a slave is terrible, the household, the mother and father of the household would now have an obligation to care for this person if they were ill. So if the slave came down ill, then usually the woman of the house would be responsible for tending to him while he gets better. So there was this idea that the slave was integrated into the family, and then they sort of swore before the gods that they were now part of the family. That being said, obviously, even in Athens, where you have this as the norm, when the Spartans set up a fort near in Attica and said, if you escape here, you can be free and go wherever you want, most of the slaves left.
You think?
It's like when the Union Army arrives in the South.
They free themselves.
Yeah.
Right.
So, I mean, even though they're actually, I guess, you could call them protections for slaves in a way, it still obviously is not the same as being free.
Right. Which brings me to the point you said that, like, when the men are all fighting this civil war, you have most slaves just left and free themselves, but you had all these, some black people still kind of hanging around white people with no type of wall between them. It's very just hypocritical and peculiar how people don't realize that these things are moving at the same time, but then ideologies are put in place and justifications are put in place. What do you think the big misconception about Greek and Roman history and slavery is?
In terms of the slavery in Greece and Rome, in the Roman world, I'd say the biggest misconception is a lot of people don't know about how common manumission was. So Roman slavery could be brutal, but at least a pretty high percentage of people would be freed at some point. Another thing that I guess a little nuance gets lost is that once you're freed, you still have obligations to your former master as a freedman, but your kids don't. So once your kids come of age, they are just free people, and also when you're a freedman and a freeman, you're a citizen. So you get automatic citizenship. So actually, Roman slavery has a rosier outlook in the end. Greek slavery tends to be easier on a day-to-day basis, but you have fewer opportunities to get out of it. That being said, some people have tried to paint a rosier picture recently because they looked at the examples of a couple banking slaves. And both of the great bankers of Athens in the 4th century happened to die without kids. So the citizens agreed to something extremely rare, freeing these slaves and letting them inherit those estates and then become citizens. And not only citizens, but among the wealthiest. And in general, in the Greek world, it is almost impossible to win citizenship if you're not born somewhere. To the point that one of the few people who won a citizenship in Athens was Herodotus. And he literally had to invent history to become a citizen. And it's a history, by the way, where obviously it talks about how great Athens is at length. So unless you're willing to go to those lengths, you're not winning freedom. And there were some slaves and also medics or outsiders who are citizens of other places who helped the Athenians restore their democracy after the Peloponnesian War. So these are guys who were literally fighting in rags during the middle of winter against a much superior force, and they eventually prevail. Well, they were granted citizenship, and then several years later, the Athenians get back together and they said, actually, do those guys really deserve it?
Interesting.
Nah. Axe them from the rolls. So, yeah. It's so in Athens and everywhere else in the Greek world, because of the jealousy over citizenship, you don't have a ton of opportunities to get away from it. In Rome, you do, but you might die before you get there. Oh, and another thing in general about the Greeks, not necessarily about slavery, but in general, a big misconception is that the idea is that the Romans are warlike, the Greeks are more balanced and a little bit more peaceful and thoughtful. But again, like I was talking about with Greek colonization, the Greeks celebrate violence. And during the classical Athenian period, they were at war 2 out of every 3 years.
Interesting.
So this is not a peaceful people. And also, it's not quite their Bible, but it's kind of like an equivalent in a way. The thing that they see as a kind of moral, ethical guide is the Iliad and the Odyssey, which are all about killing people.
Interesting.
So the Greeks are just as violent as the Romans are. They're just not as organized about it. That's the big difference.
Yeah, interesting. The northern states practice manumission.
Yeah.
So you do have that process because, of course, the North had slavery 100%, and then without slavery, those northern factories don't operate. So oftentimes people are confused about that. They've been taught that it's North versus the South, right? And it's like, no, the South left the federal government, okay? You had a significant amount of Southern states who remained loyal to the Union. In fact, that's how Andrew Johnson became our vice president. He was loyal to the Union as governor of Tennessee. The mayor of New York, Wood, wanted to succeed, not be a part of the South, but succeed because he was making so much money from Southern cotton. So I think that's a big misconception is that it was this big split, North versus South, and slavery versus anti-slavery, and it's like, that's not true. Those northern factories were operating off Southern cotton, and money was involved. However, clearly manumission and paying people wages for their labor was needed, right? Was needed.
Yeah, another thing I find interesting about the Civil War period is, especially if you talk to the kinds of people who are like really in the Southern pride and the legacy of the South, they seem to have this impression that, people in the South in general were 100% on board with the Confederacy. And I mean, there was enough support, obviously, to keep it going for 4 years, but you also have to look at desertion rates. And those desertion rates were pretty high, especially in places like North Carolina, which is about 50%.
Absolutely.
And partly it's because they only seceded in the first place because their neighbors all did.
Right.
So then once the war really starts going bad, you start seeing these North Carolina units filter out. And you'll also note that there are very few elite units from North Carolina in the war.
That's right.
I mean, there's, I think, one regiment called the Big Bethel or something like that.
Yes.
There's basically nothing else. And there's a reason for that. It's because they're not that into it. Because there aren't that many huge plantations in the state, and also the mountain region, both North Carolina and Tennessee, people there really don't support the war. I mean, in East Tennessee, it was Union country.
That's right, absolutely. And of course, that's how we get West Virginia. West Virginia succeeds from Virginia during the Civil War because they didn't want to be a part of that clown car. So they're out. Right?
And now you see rebel flags all over the place which is weird, but
and that's something I'm working on, Derek, is this trend, this ideology, and this change, and that part of that is the Daughters of the Confederacy, but this change of the Civil War over time has completely taken on this new narrative, this narrative about it not being about slavery, or this narrative that everyone supported the Civil War. In fact, Jefferson Davis, when he was senator of Mississippi and appointed president of the Confederacy, he didn't want it. He thought it was not a good idea to succeed, right? He spent a long time trying to keep the Union together, North and South, that is, and people are, they just don't understand the facts. And unfortunately, going back to what we spoke about a moment ago, a lot of this misinformation comes from people who claim to be Civil War buffs, right? They read it, and unfortunately, I just go to the primary documents, right? Alexander Stevens' cornerstone speech. I go to the Articles of Secession. I prefer the primary documents. If you want to know why someone did what they did, they will tell you. That's the beautiful thing about history, is that people wrote everything down.
It's if possible, it's always best to look at stuff that's as contemporary as possible, rather than like later memoirs that are serving an agenda of making one look better. Retrospect. One thing I've noticed, just even doing sort of basic research for list about generals from like World War I, is that their impression of people at the time is different than their impression later. So a lot of times they do play a lot of politics when they're writing memoirs.
Oh yes, and if you're a fan of the person, right, you tend to forget all the bad stuff that they did. And it's hard to be critical and objective towards someone that you really like. You want to highlight all the good stuff. So that's a human trait, but you still have to recognize it, right? You do. You still have to recognize it. And that's something, when people have the knowledge, and they're fans of a certain general, especially in the South. It happens. People are big fans of the Civil War. That's all they want to. And that's okay.
Yeah, or the idea that the people had for a long time that like Robert E. Lee was right up there with Alexander and Hannibal and Caesar and the great captains. Yeah, it's just fanboyism.
It is.
Which because just looking at it, if you're just looking at it militarily, Lee was a good tactician, but he's not on the same tier as those guys. It's just a ridiculous comparison.
Yeah. He lost Gettysburg.
And also Antietam, which I think was more egregious because it was a terrible idea to fight there in the first place.
And Lee didn't want... His father, by the way, was a... I'll just say there's a lot of black people in the DMV area that are related to Robert E. Lee. I'll just put it that way. Yeah.
As they got around.
I'll just put it that way.
Like Horse Harry Lee.
Yeah. In that area. But yeah, people in the South, they like their Robert E. Lee, and that's okay. He didn't want to succeed either. He was one of those people who thought it was a bad idea. Lincoln tried to get him on the Union side. And... for the federal government, but he clearly, a Virginian, said absolutely not. I can't do that.
Yeah.
For obvious reasons. But why some of those strategies in the South didn't work out because of Joseph Johnson and Davis not getting along, internal conflict. So yeah, people fanboy out on it, and
It's also interesting because really outside of Lee and Jackson and Longstreet, the people who really talk about how great the Confederate generals are, they kind of run out of examples after that. So it's because most of them actually weren't that good. Even in a purely military sense. I mean, there are some people who are competent, but few of them really stand out.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, to be fair, the Union generals mostly are not that great either, because most of these guys are just engineers who had never led more than a few hundred men before, and now they're trying to command 50 to 80,000 man armies, and they didn't make the transition very smoothly.
Coming across, because Lincoln originally, enlisted men for 90 days. He said this is going to be a quick situation. It didn't work out right, but when you have the Confiscation Acts and the Militia Acts, 1861, 1862, black men are now fighting, and black women, Harriet Tubman, of course. Yeah. So it's Asian Acts and the Militia Acts, 1861, 1862. Black men are now fighting, and black women, Harriet Tubman, of course. Yeah. So it just wasn't a well planned out situation. But clearly I am happy with the outcome. Obviously, but the southern states thought they would have more allies. Clearly England, a lot of that cotton is going over to England at the time, so they figured England and other European nations would ally with them, but they said this is between A and B. I'm going to see my way out of this, and I can get my cotton from India, Egypt, somewhere else.
And I mean, the whole thing is too, the Confederate government was largely incompetent. So even if they had won independence, I'm not really sure what they would have done with it.
Well, ultimately, they would have wanted to create something called the Golden Circle. So link up with Brazil. Slavery doesn't end there until 1888. So link up with Brazil, Cuba, create this entire slaveocracy that goes down through the Caribbean. Of course, Haiti has its independence now. I don't want to go down that rabbit hole, but they are Haiti, by 1804. But ultimately, the goal, they thought they could survive because of the wealth in a few, right? In a few. But no, what you said is what the general said at the time, so you're not being biased with that comment, Derek. Like Jefferson, go back and read the documents by Jefferson Davis and other people who thought it wasn't a good idea to succeed. Okay, now once it happened, you're in it, right? The die is cast. But no, originally people thought it was a bad idea. But again, over time it has taken on its own narrative that, everyone wanted to succeed and this is the greatest idea ever. And And that's just not a fact. That's just not a fact. Governor Brownlow in Tennessee after the Civil War, I mean, took it upon himself to execute rebel soldiers with impunity. Like it just wasn't this solidified brouhaha that people have made it out to be. And I think some of that comes from family members may have been veterans of the Confederacy, and stories are passed down over generations, and people have that right to feel that way. But again, it doesn't make it a fact.
Yeah, I mean, even if they were to create, this golden circle thing, I mean, still garrisoning all that, especially if the North decided to renew the war effort later on, I mean, how do you defend all this territory if you're trying to enslave a massive amount of people with a pretty small group of white people? It just isn't really feasible. I mean, it kind of runs into the overextension problem that you would see with the Germans in World War II, or even with the Neo-Assyrians. It just, when you rule in this way where it's just purely through force and you have enemies on every side of you, you eventually will falter because you're not going to win every battle, and you have a thin bench, and also a population that's more than willing to kick you out. So it's just not a very viable model.
Absolutely. It's not. But pride is, well, that's biblical, right? Pride comes before the fall. So yeah, at a point, it is pride. It is pride because, ultimately, among other things, the biggest variable is when Winfield Scott, creates, the Anaconda Plan, basically, and it does everything that you basically just said. Surround the South, cut down the middle, and then General Sherman, well, he takes care of business, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's a tough model to withstand, but it took 4 years to get things handled.
And I guess when I think about it, there have been some pretty flawed governmental models that have lasted for longer than they should. I mean, the Austro-Hungarian Empire comes to mind.
Yes.
The Holy Roman Empire. There's a bunch of them that really should not have held together, but still, that's one thing I've never quite understood is the valorization of the Confederacy. It's just not a good model.
Yeah, as a university professor who teaches American history regularly, I can honestly say I understand where the valor comes from, because it's all that has been taught. It's all perspective. Because even when I introduce, it is, and that doesn't make it right, because I say I get it. That doesn't mean I agree or I make it right. I'm just saying that if you constantly feed someone a message, that's all right? So even when I introduced the concept of California at this time, students are like, wait, what's going on in California? Like, Native Americans are being slaughtered and sold on the auction block in the West Coast, right? When I talk about, places like Oregon banning black people, so I just, people have no other, even when I introduce the concept, when we talk about manifest destiny, and I say, hello, there's people there. It's not empty. Mexicans are there. Yeah. Our Mexican brothers and sisters are there. Our Native American brothers and sisters are there. There are some black people over there. Not all black people are enslaved, right? You have a nice sized free population. So when I talk about manifest destiny, from a very important objective standpoint, I get bubble eyes. Like, what do you mean? Like, what the heck do you think I mean? Like, people are there. They're called human beings.
Yeah, so it's like, for all my life, it's been America.
No, it's important to respect both sides of this. That doesn't mean you're all perspective. Because even when I introduce, it is. And that doesn't make it right, because I say I get it. That doesn't mean I agree or I make it right. I'm just saying that if you constantly feed someone a message, that's all right? So even when I introduce the concept of California at this time, students are like, wait, what's going on in California? Like, Native Americans are being slaughtered and sold on the auction block in the West Coast, right? When I talk about, places like Oregon banning black people, so like I just like people have no other. Even when I introduce the concept, when we talk about manifest destiny, and I say, hello, there's people there. It's not empty. Mexicans are there.
Yeah.
Our Mexican brothers and sisters are there. Our Native American brothers and sisters are there. There are some black people over there. Not all black people are enslaved, right? You have a nice sized free population. So when I talk about manifest destiny, from a very important objective standpoint, I get bubble eyes. Like, what do you mean? Like, what the heck do you think I mean? Like, people are there. They're called human beings.
Yeah, so it's like, for all my life, it's been America.
No, it's important to respect both sides of this. That doesn't mean you're pushing an agenda. It just means you understand that there are people on the other side of this place that you're saying God has manifested you to get, because God loves Indians, God loves Mexicans, He likes everybody. He likes black people. God didn't tell you to enslave black people. You did that, right?
Yeah.
So those are personal choices foiled into all that ideology that's bad and incorrect.
Yeah, no, I mean, people like to use religious text creatively when they need to figure out a way to justify something. So it's interesting, the abolitionists had their reading of the Bible on the subject, and then their side had their reading, and they were each able to find what they were looking for.
Absolutely. Yeah, I have that on my, I have it actually still there. It's on my website where I posted how the Southern Baptists became Southern Baptists. And I'll just leave it at that. Because some of this is new material for people, Derek, and it's jarring when they hear it. So that's why I always encourage people to do their own research. Go a little bit past Google if you can.
Yeah.
And it doesn't mean you're bashing anything. It just means you're telling the facts.
Yeah. And
telling the facts doesn't mean you're pushing a narrative. It doesn't mean that you're against something or for something. It just means you're telling the facts. Okay? It's important. And in fact, it's important that you're able to criticize something that you appreciate. Okay? That just means you're being fair.
Yeah.
It's important. Hey, I'm a Michael Jordan fan, right? I remember when he dropped 63 on Boston, right?
Yeah.
But I could also say, man, I wish you wouldn't have never went to the Wizards. I wish you would have stopped. I could criticize my man and say, bro, I love you. People who know me know I will say, why did you come back and go to the Wizards, man?
See, I guess I have a somewhat different opinion on that, because I actually think his Wizard run was not that bad overall. I mean, because there were games where clearly he wasn't the same anymore. There were other games that were like throwback to his Bulls days. Like I think he dropped 50 the week before he turned 40.
He
or something
did,
like that.
man.
So he also had that ridiculous block where he literally snatched the ball from somebody in midair.
He did.
Which I don't think anybody's ever done that before or since.
Yeah, I do remember that. In fact, that's probably one of my favorite Jordan blocks. I will put LeBron's backboard chase down blocks up there with those. I like those chase down blocks. Those
are nasty.
Those are, jeez, give me a break.
Yeah.
I would just pull the ball out if I seen LeBron behind me. I just back it up and just let the team run down, like shoot a three.
Yeah.
That's the only time I will authorize a 3-point on a fast break, is when LeBron is chasing behind you out of fear of that chase down block.
Yeah, I guess it also depends too on who you got open for the three. Because I think now the way the NBA works is you pretty much have to take it no matter who you are if you're open.
That's the evolution of the NBA 2023.
Yes. I mean, hell, at this point, even if you're a center, if you can't shoot an open three, you can't be a starter anymore.
Right.
So.
Yeah. You got 7 footers. Yeah, Jokovic. Yeah.
So you don't necessarily be a sniper. You got to be able to make an open one.
Absolutely.
Which is kind of a crazy evolution compared to 90s basketball. where it seemed like anybody over about 6'8" couldn't shoot outside of the
Right.
paint.
You didn't have to though,
Yeah,
right?
that's true.
You didn't people had their positions. Back in the day, the league was built around big men, right? It was, the point guard. Magic kind of changed that, but back in the day, it was all about you built a team around the center, right?
Yeah.
Centers were drafted. You built a team around them, and that's how you won. And then things changed, right? The evolution of that, and I like that. I like the evolution of sports. Like some people are, back in my day.
A lot of that evolution was precisely because of how dominant Jordan was.
100%. Very much like baseball. Yeah. They moved, and basketball, right? Because of Chamberlain. They moved the damn free throw line.
Well, speaking of centers and how like Jordan's
in baseball, they moved the mound because of Bob Gibson.
Oh, I couldn't know that.
Oh, yeah. So you're right. It is. Players are dominant. Yeah.
Well, my favorite story about Jordan Pippen, in the backup center for the Bulls during the second three-peat was Bill Winnington.
Yes.
And my favorite story about Bill is literally he was instructed, don't ever stand in the paint because then you'll just block Pippen or Jordan when they're trying to dunk.
Right.
So he was literally instructed to remain about 12 feet out of the paint.
He had a nice jump shot.
Oh yeah, his baseline jumper was great.
Yeah.
But he wasn't terrible. He was decent at a few things, but when you have Jordan Pippen on your team, whatever skills he has as a center are irrelevant.
Right.
Whatever he can do is not going to be as good as leaving the paint open for them to go dunk.
Right, role players, absolutely. So, those role players.
But I can't imagine. Imagine being a 7-footer in the age of big men, and it's like, okay, your role in this team is get out of the way.
Yes.
So that way, Jordan or Pippen can dunk easier.
Yeah, absolutely.
And draw your defender away from the paint, hopefully.
Yeah, the Jordan rules. Yeah, I remember that book came out. But no, it is. It is when great players are great, God-given talent and hard work. Jordan was a hard worker. That is a sixth gear that only a certain group of people understand.
Yeah.
Right? It's a self-determination. It's a self-discipline. But that is pretty much it. It is the great players. Like when the quarterback began to start running out of the pocket, like Mike Vick, right? People, old fogies are, well, he thinks he's a running back. Like that's like.
Yeah, I'll have to introduce you to Sean sometime because he pines for the days of the running back.
Oh.
Having a big role in the offense.
Oh yeah, good luck with that, right?
Yeah.
That's. I mean, the running back is still needed.
Yeah.
We need the running back, but those days when you could give my favorite running back, Barry Sanders of all time, you could give him the ball and he would punch it in and just hand the ball to the ref and just keep it moving. Those days are over. The quarterback is now scrambling out of the pocket. The tight end is now a wide receiver almost. Those days are over. But that's good. That's good. We should all evolve.
Yeah, because I don't watch a ton of football, but it's always been fascinating to me, the relative trajectories of careers. Because if you compare with basketball, a lot of people will play for a long time, regardless of what position. But in football, if you're playing something other than quarterback, it seems like your career is maybe 5 years.
Not for long.
Yeah,
right?
if you're a quarterback, you can be in your 40s and still be dominant.
If you have a good line, absolutely. Yeah. If you have a good line, that's what people say. NFL stands for not for long. But yeah. I wonder how the Romans stacked up with that.
I know like with Olympic athletes, the ancient Olympic athletes, usually they only had 1 or 2 cycles, really. But fortunately for them, there were other games every year. So not only do you have the Olympics every 4 years, but you have like the Nemean, Isthmian, and Pythian games.
Interesting.
So you actually could make a reputation, but you maybe have about 8 or 9 years, probably. And that's assuming that you're training full-time, which also means, of course, you have to be born wealthy or have a sponsor occasionally. And then if you win a gold medal, the big prize is that for the rest of your life you eat for free at public expense, and you get to wear a garland around for the rest of your life. So basically, you just get to be a hero.
Nice.
In an official capacity. So not just like if Michael Jordan walks in and people go crazy, but he would wear a crown, not a crown, but like a garland, and
Oh,
then,
really?
people would make way. Like, here's Michael Jordan, he's our gold medalist. Give him some food and give him some wine. So that's what they were going for, and then they get an inscription with their name on it. They also got the inscription at Olympus, so they get in the history books as a victor. So I mean, it's like a whole prestige thing. And it's very much the idea the gods are watching, and this is it makes you the greatest of the Greeks. This one thing. So it's kind of the same thing as glory, but it's all about legacy, because obviously they're not doing it for money in the same way. So it'd be like just purely basing everything on accolades. Because I mean, obviously there are plenty of athletes today. If, you ask them, well, why didn't you win a championship? And then their response is, well, look at the house I live in. I mean, I'm a winner. So.
But if you played in a certain era, your answer would be Michael Jordan, right? Because there were some great players, man. Barkley, Patrick Ewing, Sean Kemp, like some of those guys. Gary Payton first. They just came up against a buzzsaw called Michael Jordan.
Yeah.
And it's crazy.
I mean, I think the biggest victim of all was Clyde the Glide, because he was another great shooting guard because he played the same position. He just got eclipsed in terms of reputation. So, I mean, whenever you hear people talking about shooting guards now, he tends to get overlooked unfairly, I think, just because he had the misfortune of playing at the same time as Jordan.
Fly slammer. Yeah, and that's why, and I wasn't a Houston fan, of course, but that's why I was happy that he was able to get that ring with Houston, because he deserved it. He deserved it. And that was a good team for sure. Clyde was the man. He is the man. So absolutely, I agree with that. He's got to dribble with his head up, though, right? Dribble with his head down. Well, he still was able to see. But he was one of my favorite, man. Back then, they had a team. Terry Porter. They had a squad.
I think, was it still Kevin Duckworth back then too? I mean, they had a pretty good team. Actually, all those teams Jordan faced in the finals were loaded. Mm-hmm. I mean, probably the worst team he faced was the Lakers in '91. Yeah. Because that was post Kareem. Yeah. But still, that wasn't a bad squad. I mean, you had Magic and Byron Scott.
Worthy.
James Worthy was still around.
He was still the man. And I mean, Magic and Kareem were the man. Don't get me wrong. I don't want to say anything. Those are my guys, but man, Worthy. He was a Swiss Army knife. Unguardable. Very much like Robert Horry, whatever team he played for around the league. Robert Horry, like he was that Swiss Army knife that could get you rebounds, shoot threes, guard all these different positions.
Kind of like one of the prototypical positionless players. Yeah.
Yes.
There are guys like that. They're not necessarily stars, but they still have this ability to contribute no matter what and just sort of blend. I mean, I think, like we were talking about the other day on the Bulls, I mean, Tony Kukoc was kind of that guy who could kind of do a little bit of everything. He could bring up the ball. He wasn't very good at defense, but other than that, on offense, he could do literally anything.
Best six man ever. That's my guy. Best six man ever. Big lefty.
Yep.
I like that left-handed shot on those players. So yeah, I agree. Tony Kukoc was my guy too. Big fan. A couple game winners. I almost tore my house down watching those. Yeah, absolutely. There was a little beef with him and Pippen. I remember when he got the last shot instead of Pippen.
Yeah, I guess that all broke out with the last. Well, it was reinitiated with the Last Dance.
Oh yeah, that's right. They did talk about it back then. Okay.
Even though Jordan was in retirement when that happened.
Yeah. I forgot they did talk about that.
I think that's really what reignited that whole beef between Jordan and Pippen, was that Jordan, allowed that to go in the documentary.
They'll work it out.
Hopefully, I hope so.
Yeah.
I mean, but yeah, because Jordan, Pippen, those are pretty much my favorite players of all time.
Yes, they are. I do not remember that story.
I think it was Boozer, so he was getting a little thin up front, so he took a Sharpie and colored it in. But then it probably looked okay when he was in the mirror, but then under his bright lights, you could tell clearly it's a Sharpie. Oh. And then he also started sweating.
You sure it wasn't dye? Hair dye?
No. It might have been some sort of bad dye, but he was putting it on a bald spot.
Oh.
So whatever it was not on hair, but on skin.
Oh, that's not going to work.
Yeah, and anyway.
Started running.
Yeah, it was bad. But
like
it was...
Giuliani? when he was Rudolph Giuliani.
Yeah, I feel like with him he
Rudy?
didn't give it enough time or something. I don't know how he did that, but
He was sweating. He was angry. He was sweating. He was.
no.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, to be fair, I think to do that he was offered like $20 or $30 million to take up that case.
Yeah.
So I mean,
I think he's been disbarred.
Oh yeah, he got disbarred for that. But also he hadn't practiced law in like 20 years, so he was not exactly a good choice to begin with.
Yeah.
He was just the highest profile person willing to do it.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's like, well, I'll make an ass of myself if you're gonna pay me $20 or $30 million. I'll go out there in front of the dildo store and make my case.
He pretty much got in some trouble. We'll just say that. We just pretty much got in some trouble.
Yeah, no, Rudy. It's sad because going into the 2000s, I mean, he was America's mayor and he was this really kind of beloved figure who broke the mob, and now he's become a complete punchline.
Yeah, he was.
Became sort of the face of populism. Then there was kind of this revisionist movement, especially on the internet, to make all previous populists like right wing and racist. And so William Jennings Bryan was reimagined. They took some because he had a thing about the working class basically being crucified on a cross of gold or something like that. And so they made it into, they tried to pretend that was an anti-Semitic remark, which is not what it was. He was just talking about the gold standard screwing over working people.
Yeah.
And so it's just amazing how sometimes things can be reinterpreted. And also, the fact is lost that for the most part, most of what the populist and progressive stood for was clearly more left than right at the time.
Right.
And I just found that deeply frustrating when that started happening, because even as someone who's not an American history expert, I knew that.
It's a narrative, right?
Yeah.
It's a narrative that is pushed, and I think it's important that people have their perspective, because no one is uniform and we all have our own personalities. It's important to think differently.
Yeah.
But just give me the facts, right? Let's not skew this to make it fit your narrative, right? It's okay to say that you're happy. For example, I mean, several people of our are from the southern states. It's okay to say you are proud to be from whatever southern state of your choice, but it's okay to say at this particular time those individuals were participating in something that was bad.
Yeah.
Right? And I think that's what I like most about President Jimmy Carter. It's hard to be different. It's hard to stand for what's right. It's hard to do that. And, that is something that Jimmy Carter really tried to do during his presidency, is to say, this is a new Georgia, right? This is a new South. Let's try. And everyone's not going to be on this bandwagon. We know that, because racism is taught. Bigotry is taught. No child comes into this world hating someone else, thinking they're better, thinking someone's less. All that is learned behavior, right? We know this. It's learned, it's taught, it's conscious, it's unconscious, it's all taught. But what I appreciate about Jimmy Carter is that he was able to say, no, it was like that, but now we're trying to move on, right? So it's okay to be happy to be where you're from and study it, but you need to be honest with yourself about the views of some people at the time, right? Yeah. And some of those views, almost all of them, were not good, all right? They were not good.
It's fascinating to me. Learned a lot more about Jimmy Carter in the last few years. How much of a celebrity following he had when he ran for president. Because I know Obama was critiqued at the time as, being too friendly with celebrities or whatever. But actually, I don't know if he actually had as much celebrity support as Carter had back in the day.
Yeah, that goes back to the narrative changing, right?
Yeah.
You're right. Carter had a huge celebrity following, but
and
this is
followed by an actual celebrity.
Yeah, exactly.
Just like Obama too. Same deal.
President Obama, he wore a tan suit. That's what he did. Woo, big controversy.
That was impeachable.
Twice.
No. So actually why because I guess Carter was before I was born, but still the presidents who've been alive in my lifetime, I'd say Carter's easily the one I respect the most, just because I feel like you can judge his intentions just by how he spent his post-presidency, I think. So clearly this is not someone who's motivated by glory, greed, or anything else. He's clearly genuine. So the things he said, he must have believed.
Pure Christian roots.
Jeff Davis being a bad commander-in-chief, and one of the things Sean always likes to talk about is how Jeff Davis kept sabotaging Beauregard because he didn't like him personally. So Beauregard, he'd put him somewhere, Beauregard would start winning battles, then Jeff Davis would yank him and replace him.
Joseph Johnston, very similar situation, and a lot of people don't know that that internal conflict with the southern states and the people in charge was a really big issue, right? So Jefferson Davis was a pretty good administrator, okay? Field commander, maybe not so much.
Yeah.
Right? So I think I'll say this. As academics, we know our strengths, right? We know our weaknesses. This woman over here is not going to try to go perform brain surgery. But I can get you the best darn brain surgeon, that I know, right? Because I know I can't handle that. I think people who are secure with what they know understand what they don't know.
Yeah. And that's also something I've never understood, how there are some PhD level people who have that overweening confidence about things that are outside of the field. Because when you learn enough to earn a PhD in something, among other things, some awareness that you should have is that the amount that you know about your subject is also the amount you don't know about a bunch of other things.
And that goes to the scientific racism, like I said, like a lot. We had a president, Thomas Woodrow Wilson, who was the president of an Ivy League. It is an arrogance. It is an overconfidence. But yeah, I read a lot about scientific racism for research purposes, and it's humorous. It's humorous how people can really write this stuff, and believe it. And believe it. And the most dangerous part of it is other people believe it, right?
Yeah.
Like I said, I read something in the New England Journal of Medicine. I have it bookmarked. I'll have to go back to it. Where, they're talking about the capacity to breathe and on skin color and all this other stuff. It's insane.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's what I did when I read it. I'm chuckling, right? This is.
Yeah. No, and it's also
a time period.
I mean, because the more modern versions of that are the people who do like those IQ by race studies or whatever.
Oh yeah.
And what I find hilarious is that what they'll do is they might find because if you're studying random samples, obviously you're going to have like a little bit of variance, obviously. Mm-hmm. So you get like 1 point difference,
right?
And then they're like, therefore, clearly, this means that we need to separate the races because otherwise, this 1 point of difference is going to make such a huge difference.
And it's been justified through the years, and people believe it. And like I said, I read a lot about it for research purposes, and it's comedic, but it's dangerous because people believe it. People believe it. But I'm going to tell you, regardless to your skin color, the hard work you put in is how you produce as far as outcome and success.
Yeah.
That's it. Skin color is definitely not related.
Yeah, I mean, most of IQ is a function of your environment and especially your nutrition when you were a kid. It has nothing to do with how much sunscreen you need.
Right. People believe it.
But I find also the people who really base their pride or identity on, there's alleged racial superiority. They're always people who have literally nothing going on in their lives.